The Warriors are staring at a decision that could define their entire season. And the ghost of a trade from exactly 12 months ago is haunting the hallways at Chase Center right now. Welcome to Warriors News Fan Report, the channel where you get the most comprehensive coverage, the deepest analysis, and all the breaking news about our beloved Golden State Warriors. I'm here every single day, tracking every roster move, every trade possibility, every strategic decision that could determine whether this franchise returns to championship contention or watches another year slip away. And what I'm about to break down for you today is a situation that has the front office in serious discussions, a player whose name keeps surfacing in trade conversations, and a cautionary tale from last season that should make every Warriors fan pause before getting too excited about inflated statistics. Before I get into the specifics of what's happening right now and why this particular moment feels so familiar, let me establish where we are as a franchise. The Warriors are in a complicated phase that nobody wants to openly acknowledge, but everyone can see. We're not the dynasty anymore. We're not the team that strikes fear into opponents just by walking onto the court. And we're not the offensive juggernaut that revolutionized basketball for nearly a decade. Our offense ranks 23rd in the league through the first 18 games, which is frankly unacceptable for a team with Stephen Curry still playing at an elite level. We're watching possession stagnate. We're seeing too much isolation basketball. We're witnessing stretches where the ball movement that defined our success has completely disappeared. And when you're the Warriors, when you have the championship pedigree and the expectations that come with this uniform, mediocrity isn't acceptable. Mike Dunleavy and the front office understand this reality better than anyone. They know that Steph's window is closing. They know that every season we waste is one less opportunity to add to his legacy. And they know that standing pat and hoping things improve organically isn't a viable strategy. That's why they're actively exploring the trade market, having conversations with other teams, evaluating which players might be available and which ones could actually move the needle for what we're trying to accomplish. And this is where things get really interesting because there's a specific type of player that keeps emerging in these discussions. Veterans putting up impressive numbers on bad teams, guys whose statistics look fantastic on paper, but whose actual impact in a winning environment remains a significant question mark. Let me take you back to December of last year, because understanding what happened then is absolutely crucial to evaluating what might happen in the coming weeks. The Warriors were struggling offensively, desperately searching for someone who could create shots, facilitate the offense, and take pressure off Steph. And there was a player available who seemed like the perfect solution. A veteran point guard playing for the Brooklyn Nets who was averaging over 18 points and nearly 7 assists per game, shooting efficiently from both inside and outside the arc, looking like exactly the kind of playmaker we needed. His name was Dennis Schrader, and on paper, the acquisition made perfect sense. We gave up De'Anthony Melton, who was injured anyway, and some second-round picks that we weren't going to use. It looked like a low-risk, high-reward move that could stabilize our offense and get us back on track. The reality of what happened next is something that still makes Warriors fans cringe when they think about it. Schrader never found his rhythm in our system, never developed chemistry with Steph and the other core players, and never came close to replicating the production he'd shown in Brooklyn. He averaged just over 10 points per game on terrible shooting percentages, and the advanced metrics were even worse. We were outscored by 130 points when he was on the floor, which was nearly double the worst plus-minus of any player on our roster for the entire season. We went 11-13 in the games he played, watching our season slip away while waiting for him to figure things out. It was a disaster that nobody saw coming, and it ultimately led to us moving him again before the deadline in that massive deal that brought Jimmy Butler to the Bay Area. So why am I spending so much time rehashing a painful memory from last season? Because history is about to repeat itself if we're not careful. And the front office is having the exact same conversations right now about a different player whose numbers look spectacular on a bad team, but whose actual fit and production in Golden State could be vastly different. The player I'm talking about is having a career year, POSTING numbers that will make any team salivate, putting up points and rebounds and assists that suggest he's evolved into a legitimate star. He's shooting efficiently, he's being aggressive, he's doing everything you'd want from a primary offensive option. And he's doing it all for a lottery team that has no playoff aspirations, no defensive identity, and no real offensive system beyond letting their best players create in isolation. Michael Porter Jr. is averaging nearly 25 points per game this season with the Brooklyn Nets, along with over 7 rebounds and 3 assists while shooting close to 40% from three-point range. Those are all-star caliber numbers. The kind of production that makes general managers pick up the phone and start exploring what it would take to acquire him. And I'm hearing from multiple sources that the Warriors are doing exactly that, having preliminary discussions about whether Porter could be the missing piece that transforms our offense from mediocre to elite. But here's the question that should be keeping Mike Dunleavy up at night. Are we looking at a genuinely elite player who would thrive in our system, or are we looking at Dennis Schrader 2.0, a guy whose numbers are inflated by circumstance and opportunity rather than actual skill and fit? Let me break down why this comparison is so relevant and why we need to be extremely careful about how we evaluate Porter's production. When you're the number one option on a terrible team, when defenses aren't game planning specifically to stop you because your supporting cast isn't threatening, when you have unlimited green lights to shoot and create, your numbers are going to look better than they would in a more structured, competitive environment. Porter is getting every opportunity in Brooklyn because they have nothing to lose. They're rebuilding. They're developing young players. They're perfectly fine with him taking 20 shots per game, even if some of them are questionable, because that's how you evaluate what you have. But put that same player on the Warriors, where he'd immediately become the third option behind Steph and potentially Draymond in terms of touches, where he'd be asked to fit into a motion offense rather than creating an isolation, where he'd face defenses that are locked in and game planning for every possession. And those numbers are going to look very different. This isn't just speculation or theory. We have concrete evidence from the Schrader situation that proves this dynamic is real. Schrader was averaging 18 points and 7 assists in Brooklyn, looking like a legitimate starting point guard who could run an offense. The moment he put on a Warriors uniform, those numbers dropped by nearly half. And it wasn't because he suddenly forgot how to play basketball. It was because the context completely changed. He was no longer the primary ball handler with freedom to operate however he wanted. He was fitting into a system with established stars and defined roles. The shots that were wide open in Brooklyn were contested in Golden State. The driving lanes that were available on a bad team disappeared when facing playoff-caliber defenses. The assists that came easy when teammates had no pressure became much harder when every possession mattered. And defenses were locked in. Now, I'm not saying Porter would definitely follow the same trajectory, and I'm not saying he couldn't be effective in a Warriors uniform. What I am saying is that we need to be realistic about what his production would look like and whether that justifies whatever assets we'd have to give up to acquire him. If Porter comes here and averages 15 points instead of 25, if his efficiency drops because he's taking fewer shots and facing better defenses, if his playmaking doesn't translate because he's not the primary creator anymore, are we actually better off than we are right now? That's the calculation Mike Dunleavy has to make, and it's not as simple as looking at the stat sheet and assuming those numbers transfer directly to a new situation. There's also the broader question of whether we should be targeting players from lottery teams at all, because this pattern extends beyond just Porter and Schrader. Look at some of the other names that have been floated in Warriors trade discussions over the past year. Trey Murphy III from New Orleans was mentioned constantly as an ideal fit, a young 3-and-D wing who could provide spacing and defense. But Murphy is putting up his numbers on a Pelicans team that's been devastated by injury and has no real offensive structure. Would those numbers translate to Golden State? Lauri Markkanen was another name that surfaced repeatedly, a 7-footer who can shoot from anywhere and looked like a potential all-star in Utah. But Utah was tanking. They were giving Markkanen every opportunity to showcase his skills, and there's legitimate questions about whether he could be that same player on a contending team with defined roles and expectations. This is the fundamental challenge facing the Warriors right now. We need to improve our roster. We need to find players who can contribute immediately. But the players who are actually available are mostly coming from bad teams where their numbers might not tell the complete story. The truly elite players, the guys who are proven winners in competitive environments, those players aren't available because their teams aren't trading them. So we're left evaluating second-tier options and trying to project whether their production is real or inflated, whether they thrive in our system or struggle like Schrader did, whether we're making a move that actually improves our championship odds or just shuffling deck chairs while our window continues to close. Let me also address the desperation factor, because I think it's relevant to understanding how the front office is approaching these decisions. Last season, when we made the Schrader trade, we were sliding. We started the year with promise, but we're watching our record deteriorate. Our offense was sputtering, and there was genuine concern that we might miss the playoffs entirely. In that context, making a move for Schrader felt necessary, even if it wasn't perfect, because standing pat and accepting mediocrity wasn't an option. We were desperate for a solution, and desperation can cloud judgment, can make you overlook warning signs, can convince you that a player's inflated numbers on a bad team will somehow translate to winning basketball in your system. The question right now is, how desperate are we? Our record through 18 games isn't catastrophic. We're still competitive most nights, and Steph is still playing well enough to give us a chance in any game. But we're also not where we need to be. We're not showing the kind of offensive firepower that suggests we can compete with the elite teams in the West. And time is running out on this core's championship window. So, does that desperation push us toward making a move for someone like Porter, even if the Schrader experience should make us cautious? Or do we exercise patience, wait for a better opportunity, and trust that internal development and chemistry building will get us where we need to be? I want to be clear about something. I'm not completely opposed to trading for Porter or any other player putting up big numbers on a lottery team. What I'm advocating for is a clear-eyed, realistic evaluation that accounts for context and doesn't just look at raw statistics. If the front office believes Porter's skills would translate to our system, if they think his shooting and scoring would genuinely help even if the numbers drop, if they've done the film study and the analytics work and concluded he's worth the assets we'd have to give up, then I trust their judgment. Mike Dunleavy has earned credibility with how he's managed this roster, and I'm not going to second-guess every decision just because we had one trade that didn't work out. But I do think we need to learn from the Schrader experience, and that means being honest about what went wrong and why. We got seduced by impressive numbers without fully accounting for how different his situation would be in Golden State. We underestimated how much his production was a product of opportunity rather than skill. We overestimated how quickly he'd be able to integrate into our system and develop chemistry with our core players. And we paid the price with 2 months of mediocre basketball that put our entire season in jeopardy. If we're going to make another trade, if we're going to bring in another player from a lottery team, we cannot afford to make those same mistakes again. There's also the asset management question that can't be ignored. What would it take to get Porter from Brooklyn? Are we talking about young players who are part of our future? Are we talking about draft picks that could be valuable down the line? Are we talking about taking on bad contracts that would limit our flexibility going forward? The Nets aren't just going to give away a player who's averaging 25 points per game. They're going to want real value in return, and we have to decide whether that value is worth paying for a player whose production might be significantly different in our uniform. This is where the Schrader comparison becomes even more relevant. We gave up assets for him. They weren't massive assets, but they were still resources we could have used elsewhere, and we got essentially nothing in return. Can we afford to make that same mistake again with potentially higher stakes? Let me also talk about the elephant in the room. Our offensive struggles aren't just about personnel. They're also about system and execution. Yes, adding another scorer could help, but is that really the core problem? Or is the issue that our ball movement has deteriorated, that we're relying too much on isolation, that our spacing isn't what it used to be, that teams have figured out how to defend us and we haven't adjusted? Bringing in Porter or any other player isn't going to magically fix those systemic issues. If anything, adding another isolation scorer might make some of those problems worse by encouraging more one-on-one play instead of the beautiful, flowing offense that defined our championship years. Steve Kerr has to be part of this conversation too. How does he feel about potentially integrating another new player into the rotation? How confident is he that Porter would fit into what he's trying to do schematically? The Schrader situation was painful partly because we could never quite figure out how to use him effectively. He didn't fit naturally into our offensive sets. His defensive limitations were exposed against good teams, And by the time we admitted it wasn't working, we wasted 2 crucial months of the season. We cannot afford a repeat of that scenario, which means Kerr needs to be completely honest with the front office about whether he believes Porter or any other trade target would actually make us better. So here's where we are right now. The Warriors are exploring the trade market. Porter's name is definitely in the conversation, along with several other players from lottery teams. And the front office is trying to balance the need to improve the lessons learned from last season's Schrader disaster. The next few weeks are going to be crucial in determining which direction we go. Do we make an aggressive move and hope it works out better than last time? Do we exercise caution and wait for a clearer opportunity? Do we trust internal development and chemistry building to get us where we need to be? These are the questions Mike Dunleavy is wrestling with right now, and the answers will determine whether we're legitimate contenders or just another team fighting for playoff positioning. My personal take, after analyzing all the factors and considering everything we've learned from past mistakes, is this: we should be extremely cautious about trading for players whose numbers are inflated by playing on bad teams. The Schrader experience taught us that those statistics often don't translate to winning basketball in a competitive environment, and we can't afford to waste another season chasing empty production. If we're going to make a trade, it needs to be for a player whose skills clearly fit our system, whose production we believe will translate even if the raw numbers drop, and whose acquisition doesn't cost us so much in assets that we're hamstrung going forward. Porter might be that player, or he might be Schrader 2.0. The front office needs to figure out which one before pulling the trigger on any deal. Now I want to hear from you, Warriors fan, and I need you to be completely honest. Do you think we should trade for Michael Porter Jr. or any other player putting up big numbers on a lottery team? Have we learned the lessons from the Schrader disaster, or are we about to repeat the same mistakes? What would you be willing to give up to improve this roster, and how confident are you that those improvements would actually translate to winning basketball? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this is exactly the kind of critical discussion our community needs to be having right now. If you made it this far, smash that like button to support the in-depth analysis I'm bringing you every single day. Subscribe to Warriors News Fan Report so you never miss breaking news or critical roster updates. And turn on those notifications because the trade deadline is approaching fast and things are going to move quickly. This is our championship window. These are the decisions that will define our franchise's immediate future. And I'm here to break down every single development with you. Dub Nation, forever